This right here is a very famous bust of former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. It is a bronze bust made by American-born sculptor Jacob Epstein in 1946. 55 years after that, in 2001, the British government gave this bust to us, lent it to us as a gift. It loaned it to the United States essentially as a show of solidarity with our new president at the time, with George W. Bush. George W. Bush was so taken with the gifted Winston Churchill bronze bust that he put it right in the Oval Office. He put it on top of a small chest of drawers located right next to the famous Resolute desk. You can see it just over President Obama's head there. Presidents do not all keep the same things in the Oval Office that their predecessors put there. If they did, a lot of them would have accumulated by now. It would be cluttered. Nixon, for example, was notorious for his knickknacks. That's not true. But when President Obama was sworn in and the Oval Office was redecorated, the Churchill bust went back to the British Embassy. It was replaced by some other thing. Now, is that a crisis? No, that is not really a crisis, but that's only because you are not thinking like John Boehner. Right now, we are in the midst of yet another congressional crisis. A real and really bad thing urgently needs congressional action to prevent it from happening. The bad thing this time is taxes going up on 160 million Americans in 11 days unless Congress acts, unless they act to extend the payroll tax cut, which expires at the end of this year. The solution offered by the Democrats in the face of this crisis was, hey, let's extend the payroll tax cut for a year. That way taxes won't go up on anybody. Ta-da! Crisis averted. Not that complicated. Democrats in the Senate found a way to do that. It was not easy, but Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans found a bipartisan, broadly popular way to get it done, to extend the payroll tax cut for a couple of months, and then they would seek a longer extension later. That measure passed hugely in this hugely divided Senate by a margin of by a vote of 89-10. Senate Republicans were so psyched about this deal that this was the scene right after the meeting, which they ironed out all the details. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell asking for and receiving a high five from fellow Republican John Barrasso. And then that deal that Senate Democrats came up with and that Senate Republicans were so psyched about that they were high-fiving, that bipartisan deal got handed off to House Speaker John Boehner and the House Republicans, who today, with this looming crisis now just 11 days away, decided to reject it. Sure, this real and really bad thing is about to happen to the entire country, but they had other stuff to do.
Winston Churchill was the best friend America ever had. And I ask my colleagues to join me in honoring his legacy of persistence, determination, and resolve. This resolution will honor the former British Prime Minister by placing a bust of him in the United States Capitol.
Presumably to try to make a political issue out of President Obama not keeping George W. Bush's Winston Churchill bust in the Oval Office. House Republicans have spent their time in the House this week, among other things, voting to place a bust of Winston Churchill inside the United States Capitol instead of the one that was in the Oval Office. So, America, when your paycheck shrinks substantially on January 1st, at least you can take comfort that we'll have the Churchill bust to cuddle up to in the Capitol if we need to. Congress did make sure to handle that bust. Yes. Looming inexplicable tax hike with bad economic consequences. No, that we cannot do.
The House Republicans say they don't dispute the need for a payroll tax cut. What they're really trying to do, what they're holding out for, is to wring concessions from Democrats on issues that have nothing to do with the payroll tax cut. Issues where the parties fundamentally disagree.
House Speaker John Boehner, even though he reportedly signed off on this payroll tax thing plan over the weekend, he is now insisting that passing a 2-month extension of the payroll tax cut is not enough.
A 2-month extension is nothing more than kicking the can down the road.
John Boehner is right. A 2-month extension is just kicking the can down the road. But if his House Republicans won't kick that can down the road anymore, the can will cease to be kicked down the road. And in his metaphor, that means taxes go up on everyone who gets a paycheck in America in 11 days. Rather than averting that crisis, House Republicans have instead decided to use the leverage created by that crisis to try to do a whole host of other things on their agenda. Stuff like pushing states all across the country to do forced drug testing as a condition of getting your unemployment benefits that you've paid for. Because the real unemployment in this problem in this country is about drugs? Really? They think that's going to solve the problem? If you just drug test people, then all of a sudden we'll have full employment? They're doing things like blocking millionaires from receiving unemployment insurance or food stamps. How many millionaires do you think receive unemployment insurance or food stamps? Here's how the New York Times put it when they looked into that proposal. Quote, millionaires on food stamps are about as rare as petunias in January. This is a problem that does not exist. And trying to solve problems that don't exist has become a specialty among John Boehner's House Republicans this year. As Steve Bannon at the Washington Monthly put it recently, quote, the list of policy initiatives launched by Republicans to address problems that don't exist keeps growing. GOP officials are passing measures to combat voter fraud without instances of actual voter fraud. House Republicans voted to eliminate a proposed EPA farm dust regulation, despite the fact that the EPA has no proposed farm dust regulation. GOP officials recently passed a resolution to affirm "In God We Trust" as the national motto. But "In God We Trust" was already the national motto. Now they're tackling benefits for millionaires that hardly ever go to millionaires. Right now, even with a real crisis going unattended to, there are a whole lot of big, aggressive Republican solutions coming out of the House for problems that do not actually exist. And that is always a way to serve some other agenda that is unspoken to by the fake problem. So saying you are fixing a non-existent voter ID problem, that turns out to be actually a convenient way to change voting rules to make it harder for likely Democratic voters to register or to vote. This EPA boogeyman fake dust regulation freakout, turns out it's a handy way to try to bolster business interests' regulations kill jobs ideology. It's a way to make regulation itself sound crazy. They want to regulate dust. Can you believe it? Regulation must always be stupid. The "In God We Trust" thing is a way to create a wedge issue for Christian Democrats. It's a way to try to make Democrats feel like if they are Christians, maybe they ought to vote Republican. And the idea of ending unemployment benefits for millionaires is that you fundamentally change a program in order to eventually break it apart. One economist telling the New York Times this about the Republican proposal, quote, this is a way of trying to put an income test on the unemployment system that has never existed in the past. This is a really important point. Why are they going off on this millionaires unemployment insurance, millionaires food stamp thing? Take the unemployment program. This is about making the unemployment insurance program a program that is not for everybody. It's not for everybody anymore. Instead, it's just for poor people. And that is the first big step toward undermining for that sort of program for everybody. Now, in part, that's because when only people with not very many resources are the beneficiaries of a particular program, those people don't have very many resources. And that also means they don't have very much political power to protect that program once politicians try to tear it apart. It's also because when a program is seen as just being for poor people, that program is susceptible to losing broad public support when it inevitably gets attacked from the right as waste. We have certain entitlements in this country that have been around for generations and that have remained intact. Social Security, Medicare, unemployment insurance. These are programs that work politically in part because they apply to all of us. They are for all Americans. When you're 65, you get Medicare, you get Social Security. When you lose your job, if you have paid into the unemployment insurance program, you get unemployment insurance. You are by definition entitled to these things, and these things have been a huge success in the story of America. They are our social safety net. They have kept people out of poverty. They have kept food on the table. They have allowed us to retire one day instead of working our entire lives until we die. But the thing about them is that they are entitlements. And that is as important to what they mean to us as Americans as it is to their political survival. You get these things if you're rich or if you're poor. We do not discriminate by class. As Americans, we get them. But when you try to change those programs so that instead of benefiting everybody, they just benefit, say, poorer Americans, you set the stage to break those programs apart because the right has come up with really great politics for making the rest of the country resent programs that only serve poor people. So suddenly, means testing unemployment insurance. That may seem like a throwaway line in a Republican proposal. That's not a real problem. Why are they working on that? Well, it is a way to start to dismantle that as an entitlement, to make us think of unemployment insurance as something that only applies to poor people. And that's why the Paul Ryan kill Medicare thing really isn't a lie. Today, the self-proclaimed but quickly becoming irrelevant website PolitiFact declared the idea that Republicans voted to end Medicare their lie of the year for 2011. That comes after lots of lobbying by Paul Ryan for that to be declared a lie. But make no mistake, what the Republicans have proposed is actually ending Medicare. I mean, the whole idea of Medicare is that everybody gets it. It's not something that divides America. It doesn't matter if you're rich or you're poor. You, as an American citizen, are entitled to Medicare once you turn 65. The Paul Ryan plan would end Medicare. It would make Medicare something that not all Americans get anymore, which means it's not Medicare. This is about changing the social safety net to make its politics more like welfare politics and less like Social Security and Medicare politics. Ask Americans how they feel about Social Security and Medicare. Those programs are more popular than a cold drink on a hot day. Look at that. Now, if you make those programs just for some people, see how popular they become. Right now, House Republicans are playing chicken again. This time, it's not the debt ceiling or a looming government shutdown. This time, it's almost every adult American getting substantially less money in their paycheck as of January 1st, courtesy of a Republican tax hike on working people. Merry Christmas. And Republicans are willing to bear the political cost of doing that for the prize of starting to rip our social safety net around the edges, for the prize of making the American people see the social safety net not as something that we all have, but instead seeing it as something that other people might need someday, something that other people might use someday, but never us. Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer of New York joins us next.